Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first of many interviews which we'll be conducting regarding the D-Day campaign that is now just concluding. If you're watching this video, that means that the D-Day campaign has officially ended. The 94, not quite 100 player D-Day game has finally come to a close. The results of that will have to wait for the after-action report and the debrief. This is not the debrief. The debrief will be linked in the comments section, or in the description, probably is more convenient. So, today we're interviewing one of the principal commanders involved, Erwin Rommel, known in real life by his other name, Tac Covert. And so we will be going over his strategy going into the game, and, of course, his maneuvers, his orders, what happened during the game, and what he thinks is currently going on and will happen in the future at the end of the game. So, without any further ado, Tac, would you like to go over the German plan at the beginning of the game and how that developed?
So the German plan, at the beginning, we had two possible courses of action we needed to defend against. Two with kind of a third variation. The first was a traditional assault, which would utilize traditionally your Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, and Sword beaches. That's roughly. Don't hold me to those exact points. And so obviously, those are the obvious beaches, and they were used historically because they are good for that. So we had to cover against that. Also had a secondary issue of landings along the western beaches on the peninsula. There's not as many, but they are there. And a third option, kind of a variation, would be a direct assault on Cherbourg via a couple of okay-ish beaches that are kind of near Cherbourg. To deal with this, I ordered the... I'm going to get these numbers wrong. Ordered General Mark's Corps, which is...
I believe it's the 84th.
84th, yep. I've got the 84th and the 81st. Yep. I ordered the 84th Corps to deploy in what you could call the Con sector, primarily. Also, 21st Panzer was sitting at Con, but I didn't have direct control of them. I had to wait for Der Führer to allow me to control them. So I had General Marks deploy his 84th Corps along this line. His corps is primarily static divisions. He did not have a significant mobile reserve. But he deployed roughly speaking from Omaha Beach all the way across what would be the historical British beaches. I actually gave 81st Corps, which traditionally 352nd Division was on Omaha Beach. And in some swaps with 81st, I swapped them 352nd to 81st Corps because I felt that Utah Beach was, no matter what option was taken, Utah Beach was going to get hit. So Utah Beach had 352nd Division. Commander's intent at that point was to put a static division on Cherbourg to cover that, and to put a static division covering the better beaches over here on the western peninsula. Those divisions simply don't have a lot of capability. My mobile reserves, divisions that had decent mobility were kind of in order of how much mobility they have. 21st Panzer at Kahn, and then I had 91st Luftlandedivision and 3rd Fallschirmjäger divisions. 352nd was also relatively mobile as well, but I knew I was going to need them on a beach because that's functionally my most powerful infantry division, and I needed them where they could do the most good. What ended up happening is that 3rd Fallschirmjäger ended up covering a large swathe of the beach over here on the west. And which was a deviation made by the Corps commander in order to put more of the static divisions in some northern positions closer to Cherbourg. And that kind of did remove them as being the mobile reserve and made 91st the mobile reserve, which they ended up getting bogged down sort of with between the paratroopers and all the other chaos going on. So that was the plan. Obviously, I had stripped the eastern beaches to bare bones in order to make that plan happen, with the intent that if they needed help, 21st Panzer could be brought to bear to assist them.
So that's about what your deployment ended up looking like, at least according to your description. Yeah, actually, 91st would have incorporated something more along these lines. There we go. So that's what your deployment ended up looking like at the beginning of the game. And so, as you mentioned, stretched relatively thin, not a lot of reserves, though potentially if somewhere wasn't attacked, you could shift the divisions that were on the beaches to somewhere else, right? So you could shift units theoretically from one beach to another. And so I want to ask you, what was your gut instinct on where the Allies were going to land before the game actually started?
My gut instinct was telling me that we were definitely going to have landings at Utah Beach, and that's why I had flatly ordered the best infantry division I had to cover that beach area. No matter if they chose an east or west option, that beach was getting hit. It's a good landing beach, and it's basically the linchpin of from either direction. Given some information that I kind of picked up on from talking to players and getting an idea of how everybody thinks and acts, my gut was telling me that we were going to see landings over here. Initially, there wasn't a whole lot of focus at defending the western beaches because that's not the historical beaches. So there wasn't an enormous amount of focus defending those. The focus was defending Cherbourg, Carentan, and the traditional beaches. But I heavily pushed that, hey, we're gonna have some issue. My gut wasn't as far south as things ended up happening. I was actually feeling like more of a northern approach, probably a case of pulling the Sword Beach landing that historically bogged down at Carentan forever and shifting that over in a bid to snatch Cherbourg quickly. So that was my gut. Although I did believe that we were going to see landings, at least on these two beaches.
Interesting. So, in that event, you would think that the Americans might shift their forces from Omaha to the west for a coup de main on Cherbourg, and then the British would take over Omaha, Gold, and Juneau?
Yeah,
school?
I would actually figure they would pull the Canadians for the coup de main on Cherbourg, and you'd have the Americans and British hit more of the traditional beaches.
Okay. And did you expect anything from their special forces? You know, their commandos, that kind of thing. Did you expect them to do any shenanigans with those early on, or?
I expected we had a number. Obviously had fortifications. I expected there to be moves on fortifications, as well as moves on any actual headquarters that can be identified. Early on in the once I knew the battle started, I immediately basically mounted up and left my headquarters because I did have anticipation that any known high level HQ was going to be a target for them to try to rush for and take out in order to just go ahead, decapitate, and let everything fall apart. It's already, and for people that don't play this on this scale, as a high command on this scale, it's playing chess in the dark. Everybody's yelling at you on the radio that this is going wrong, that's going wrong, we're attacking here, we're retreating here, and you're just staring at the map, pulling your hair out, trying to figure out where the heck your people are.
And let me, before we move on to some of the problems of command that you just brought up, I want to, for the sake of the Allied airborne troopers, who are some of the most active players in the game, where did you expect airborne divisions to drop pre-invasion? What was your gut feeling about where that was going to happen?
My gut feeling was that Carentan was going to get hit. That's a key crossroads. Whether they went an east or a west move, Carentan is a key crossroads to seize. If you can seize it before things get blown, you have a good shot at allowing free movement off the peninsula or onto the peninsula, whichever way you need.
Mm-hmm.
Without that crossroads, you're basically stuck going down towards St. Lo to actually get to the next major crossroads that'll allow you to get across all of this low-lying fields and irrigation canals, and that's just a nightmare.
Yeah.
I also expected probably Valone to get taken by airborne. To some degree, the traditional airborne targets are targets I expected. And then, depending on whether they went for a western side or a eastern side move, I either expected an airborne drop on Khan or near Khan to try to seize it before it could become a dug-in mess. Because there's no way you're hiding 21st Panzer from aerial recon. They know the tank divisions are there, but they know it's to the south. So a move to seize Khan and be able to bottleneck that division before they get a chance would allow anybody landing on these beaches to shove straight through and actually be in a good position to keep 21st Panzer out of the fight. If they went for an eastern approach, I actually expected a move to try to cut off Cherbourg, because the natural inclination for the Germans, if the front is beginning to collapse on the peninsula, would be for everybody closest to Cherbourg to fall back on that, form a ring, and force a siege while everybody else falls back out of the peninsula. So those were kind of my wild cards. I felt like the airborne would either drop towards one or the other, more towards one or more towards the other.
So somewhere kind of in here area. Interesting. Okay. All right. So that was your impression. And then what ended up being the reality? How did it kind of start off for you?
So I got woken up. I don't remember exactly what time of morning it was, with reports of heavy fighting against paratroopers. I immediately start furiously ringing to get 21st Panzer
I
stood
might
up.
add, by the way, just as a something of an aside, that Rommel's HQ, if I can pinpoint it on the map here, this was Rommel's HQ at the beginning of the game. So that's where he's starting the game from. I'll even turn it red. Sorry, Tack, you go ahead.
Yeah, now you're good. So I immediately started ringing the stand units up. I wanted to start getting reports, and I definitely wanted 21st Panzer to go ahead because I knew it was going to take time to get them stood up. Even if we instantly got control of them, it was going to take time to get that coordinated because they were directly under high command, and I didn't have any control over their movement or their deployment. So I knew it was going to take time. So I wanted to get them stood up and moving. I also it was pandemonium. The reports I was getting were basically chaos, and just kind of a case of paratroopers are everywhere. The one place I knew paratroopers were was Carentan, and I knew that 91st was fighting over Carentan with the paratroopers, and that was a major issue. I knew 352nd was fighting over St. Mary-Glise with the paratroopers, which obviously concerned me slightly because that's not too far from my HQ. As far as anywhere else the paras were, really didn't have a good clue. I believe my corps commander, which is Sam, had to actually displace due to the paratroopers. So I was having trouble getting comms with everybody. Also, it's first thing in the morning, so we're having issues getting comms with everybody anyway.
Yeah, so with the airborne landings, and of course all these reports coming in, and kind of it being chaos, and I want you to talk about a little bit. One of the fun things we did as umpires was started the game 3 or 4 weeks before we told everyone we would, so that the actual opening turn would be when the landings happened, so that we wouldn't have people waiting. So that we wouldn't have 75% of the players start the game and your report is, you're waiting on your ship. You're right. So can you talk a little bit about what it was like getting woken up in May, right? And then realizing, oh shoot, the game's already begun.
It wasn't super unexpected. I didn't know how y'all were going to handle the airborne stuff, but I figured there would have to be something there. Otherwise, otherwise the game would have been horribly unbalanced towards the Germans. As because none of my players were absolutely restricted from planning sorts of communication. We weren't in a blackout, so nobody knew anything until they were activated, but we weren't in a complete blackout, so it would have unbalanced things against the paras had we all been up and going, I bet something's about to happen. Oh wait, somebody just got a report.
Right.
So that worked out very well for immersion and for balance purposes to keep it from incidentally becoming unbalanced towards the Germans. It was a madhouse because you're getting all these conflicting reports. And in my position, I'm not getting reports from regimental commanders. I'm getting reports straight from divisions. So by the time the reports are filtering up, from these airborne landings, I really don't have a good idea where they are, except for when they are on a major city, or a major town, I should say. Based on the information that I was getting, it appeared we were looking at St. Marigles and Carentan as primary targets of the airborne, and I didn't know completely how many other issues we were having, but it looked like we were getting possibly 82nd Airborne at St. Marigles, which would have actually be somewhat historical, and possibly 101st at Carentan, but sitting here doing counting in my head, going, okay, our intel, we know there's more airborne than that. Where is it?
And so, did you ever end up hearing about the Lost Airborne Division, or was that something that remained a mystery for most of the game? Or
there was a Lost Airborne Division.
Was there? I don't know. I can't tell you that. Did you
I
get
don't know
reports
either.
of? Okay, all right. So you didn't. So as far as you were aware, there were 2 airborne divisions that landed and harassed your men.
I wouldn't say harassed. I would say created a major pain to deal with.
Yeah.
By themselves, they could have been reduced, but they definitely caused a lot of issues for what were, again, my 91st Luftwaffe Division was supposed to be the reserve, and then they're bogged down fighting airborne.
Right. The reserve has become the front line.
Yep, the reserve is now absolutely caught and can't redeploy properly. And 352nd, which should be focusing on
You good there?
yeah, sorry about that.
Yeah, you're good.
352nd, which should be focusing on the beach, is now concentrating on dealing with airborne behind them.
And so, did that throw? Obviously, it threw a wrench in your plans. But was that, would you say, a critical blow, or was that one of, death by 1,000 cuts, and that was just one of them?
I wouldn't say it was a critical blow. The most critical thing the airborne did was when they actually captured Carentan. That was the critical blow portion. The 91st Division's commander in our planning sessions had really focused on we want to deploy close to Carentan. And there was a lot of discussion back and forth. Carentan gives you a lot of options to move, but it also kind of ties you to this one terrain feature that's surrounded by swamp and canals. So if you get trapped there, you're trapped there. And we ended up at least as far as I know, we ended up losing probably a regiment in Carentan because they got trapped there and surrounded by the airborne and ultimately wiped out. And then I may have used my one army asset to turn Carentan into rubble.
Okay, so Carentan was really, up until that point, the airborne was manageable, and then once Carentan fell, at that point they became more than just annoying and a problem that could be dealt with later.
Right. Once Carentan fell, that is the point that the ability to, because the 711th, 243rd, 716th don't have great mobility, but they can move. They're road marching, not road driving. So as long as we held Carentan, if 352nd got in trouble and it turned into, hey, this is a western beach option, this is a total peninsula option, then I could start shifting most of the divisions through Carentan directly into the peninsula. And what wound up happening was I was having to shift I was having to send a counterattack against Carentan and then try to also shift troops through St. Lo in order to get the 84th Corps into the fight. Had we been able to hold Carentan and that never been captured, I could have immediately shifted 711th Division to support 352nd and brought 243rd and 716th through Carentan as well, and been able to form a nice front. I would have also had 91st Division not stuck fighting the airborne, which they ended up, at least to my knowledge, they ended up bogging down fighting the airborne basically all day. So my mobile reserve on the peninsula became a static reserve dealing with the airborne, and my very weakened other corps wound up being out of the fight for a long time.
In the case of some of them, probably out of the fight, just period, end of sentence. Just having to spend the entire day marching. Yeah.
Yep.
And so
because you can't even start a mass movement of marching. I ordered them to start forming some Kampfgruppen relatively early in the day. Once I started to get inclinations that this wasn't going to be an assault on their beaches because Khan was unhit, and that was kind of, once I knew Khan wasn't hit, once I knew Bayou wasn't hit by airborne, that told me they're not going at those beaches. There's no way they're going to dump all of their airborne more on the peninsula and leave those alone if they were going after Gold, Juno, or Sword, or even Omaha. So I ordered some Kampfgruppen built relatively quickly to get the whatever mobile battalions they had. A lot of those divisions had some bicycle troops and things that were faster, if not mobile, but much faster moving. And I ordered all of them assembled, and General Mark started putting different Kampfgruppen together. And that was kind of the point where, had 91st not been bogged down fighting the airborne, they would have been open to maneuvering to support kind of everywhere. That's one place where I regret. My original plan with 91st was actually for them to have been sitting between Perrier and St. Lo. And I do regret shifting them up towards Carentan because they wound up bogged down where they could have been. They could have let the airborne land, and once the airborne lands and loses that surprise effect, if you bring decent infantry, and 91st was decent infantry, if you bring decent infantry to bear, or God forbid, armored support to bear, and it's not piecemeal ad hoc units that are struggling in the dark to find each other, it's actual formations, they'll roll over airborne. Because airborne just doesn't have the supporting elements to really maintain it long term in a firefight. So that was definitely a regret, was sitting in a defense of Carentan rather than letting the airborne take it. If they dropped in and taken it, and I'd been able to make a strong counterattack with actual regiments that were fully manned, knew what they were doing, and had good communication, that would have probably worked out better.
Okay, so in the after kind of, right, of course, the Monday morning quarterback, it's we should have had 91st in much farther back, not as forward deployed as they were. Yes. Okay. And
let 352nd take it on the chin a little bit harder at the beginning, because they wouldn't have that support right there with them. But at the same time, they would get support from an entire division at once, rather than piecemeal support from battalions and artillery batteries.
Yeah. And of course, moving now a little bit to the actual beach assault, I'm wondering, of course, your divisions are pretty spread thin, especially 3rd Fallschirmjäger. Would the same principle apply, do you think, in retrospect, right? Do you think that if you were to do this again, perhaps one or two of these divisions could have been better used if they were pulled back and then sent to attack Allied forces that had already established themselves on a beach?
Possibly. That's kind of a yes and no, because once they've established themselves on the beach, now they have armored support. My armored support's relatively limited.
Mm-hmm.
If I had to do this again, I would have still done the swap of 352nd, but I would have probably third Fallschirmjäger was an add-on unit that I could choose where to add it. I would have probably put say 711th Division into 81st Corps to cover the western beaches and spread 243rd and 716th out broader, but had 3rd Fallschirmjäger behind them as an elite support division that can also be a mobile reserve.
So
And
perhaps putting it in the area just southwest of Bayou is what you're thinking.
yeah, third if I'd had 3rd Fallschirmjäger there, and thinking on this for either direction. If airborne wants to assault, probably the worst thing for them to jump in on is other airborne. Obviously, really good mechanized infantry is the worst, but short of them dropping right onto 21st Panzer's head, probably the worst place they could drop would be right on the head of an actual airborne division, because that's light infantry that fights independently jumping in on light infantry that fights independently and knows how they fight.
Right.
So that would have been a superior setup there had they come in on the traditional beaches, and it would have also put a static division covering that front. Now they would have been spread out more, but it would have given me a division that's supposed to stand and fight in place in the fighting in place job, and given me a division that's mobile to be able to throw at that problem. One thing that, getting a little ahead of ourselves, but when 21st Panzer did get into the fight, obviously it has its own integral infantry, but had they come into the fight with 91st Luftland or 3rd Fallschirmjäger at the same time, and you get that kind of 2-division corps, and you have a full infantry division to grab the enemy, hold on to them, and not let them go while your mechanized infantry and armor works their way around a flank, would have come off a lot better.
Right, and so you would have almost, in retrospect, you would have almost had, well, you would have had 3 divisions in the reserve role. You would have had 91st between Perrier and Saint-Lô, 3rd Fallschirmjäger just southwest of Bayou, and then 21st Panzer around Caen. And that would have been a very solid reaction force for any potential beach landing.
Well, and the other thing with it is, unlike 21st Panzer, where I had to, and I think it took a couple of hours before I got permission to control them.
Mm-hmm.
Had I put 3rd Fallschirmjäger at Bayou and spread 243rd, 716th out and shifted 711th over to 81st Corps, or actually just not shifted 711th out of 81st Corps, that would have given me a reserve division that was unmolested and mobile from the minute I was aware that something's going on. That is literally a telephone call, and that division is standing up, getting to trucks and getting moving.
Mm-hmm. And so now, with that kind of retrospect established, let's talk about what actually ended up happening. So where did you get reports of troops landing, and how did the landings progress? How did you fight against that?
Well, I got reports of troops landing at different points that almost sounded like troops landing everywhere. Utah Beach knew that was going to happen, and it did. So 352nd was in a fight with the paratroopers, and they're still in that fight with the paratroopers when the beach assault happens. So they end up being a sauerkraut sandwich.
Yeah. And who were
Otto,
the troops attacking 352nd?
It was Americans, but that's all I know.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm very well aware that that somewhere somewhere not too far away from my HQ, I think somewhere around here was the 101st Airborne, because it got to the point of the conflicting reports and honestly the doom and gloom to some of the reports as they were coming in, that I ordered up a half track and started driving around myself to try to see what was going on, because that is the hardest part of high command in this era. Is it you don't get to see. If you're used to playing Civil War or Napoleonic, you're used to getting on a hill and being able to see what's going on to some degree around you. You are completely divorced from that. You were staring at a map. It's a staff simulator as you're trying to figure out what is going on, who actually needs support, because everybody's requesting support at all times. It's very rare that somebody's saying no, we're fine, we don't need anything. Most people are saying variations from oh god, we're all gonna die, to we're okay right now, but we could use some help later.
Right. And so, how did you balance that? Right. Of course, everybody's given you these reports, especially say 352nd or 91st or folks that are getting the hardest pressed. How do you balance those priorities, and what did you end up doing to try and make the best of a bad situation there?
So my directly controlled assets were limited. I had railway guns at Falaise that could range over a decent chunk of the peninsula, especially on the southern end. So once we knew Carentan had fallen, I ordered a bombardment of Carentan with heavy artillery. It's not really. It's more of a grid square deletion tool, and not a enemy troops are over here, shoot them. So so my ability to order that around was somewhat limited. Its rate of fire is limited. Its actual effects on target were limited to a degree. However, with something like Carentan in particular, bombarding it let me paralyze whatever American units were there. Could either get away from it or hunker down, and you weren't moving anything through the beaten zone while that bombardment was going on.
Mm-hmm.
Ultimately, that battery of 2 railway guns ended up being everybody's go-to. Hey, I need support. Can you get that to fire? And its effects were relatively limited in a lot of cases, or at least unknown. I'm sure it was a significant emotional event for any infantry company that had 11-inch shells landing on them.
Right, as you would imagine, yeah.
So my only other asset, and this was my fault for letting 91st be so far forward. My only other asset was 21st Panzer, and getting those Kampfgruppen build up from 84th Corps as we became more and more aware that, okay, they're definitely not attacking those beaches. Now we need to pull everybody out and get moving. So we had a series of Kampfgruppen, starting with the most mobile units, then whatever could be thrown together in the 711th area of operations, and then basically anything else that is mobile-ish if you hook a horse and or truck to it or tell it to march. And we kind of had this succession of those heading towards that battle space.
And I'm wondering, Around what time, just a guess, you don't have to like go back through all your reports and get the exact time, but around when do you think was that decision made to decisively commit to the idea that the Allies were making a Western thrust rather than an Eastern one?
Probably about 8 by 8 a.m. It was by 8 a.m. I was definitely firmed up that they are not committing to anything in the East. Now, it was a little after that before I actually got more moving, but they were definitely having Kampfgruppen making their way towards the battle space by 8 a.m. Which I think so.
And were those Kampfgruppen successful in achieving the objectives you set out for them, or was it mostly ineffectual by the time that the game ended?
To my knowledge, there was one Kampfgruppen that was successful, at least to a degree. We had a problem with once Carentan was taken, the Americans starting to push off the peninsula through Isigny, kind of towards the back of Omaha Beach, and down heading kind of on the road towards Bayou ultimately. So that Kampfgruppen that came up and hit at Isigny, at least in the case of stopping the bleeding, because we were just hemorrhaging there. At least in that case of stopping the bleeding, I feel that was successful. At the time the game ended, we were just getting kind of the first tendrils of these other Kampfgruppen were getting into St. Lo and starting to firm up what ultimately would be firming up the red line with infantry. And then my goal was to get the 91st out, along with elements of the 352nd that could get out, and the 21st Panzer, and form what's this purple line to cut the peninsula off and contain the situation.
And just based on your best guess, because of course we haven't actually run this far, do you think you could have established a line like that by the evening?
By the evening, yeah. I don't think it would be a very firm line, but I think I could have definitely gotten a line established by the evening. And then going into overnight, which overnight works to my advantage more than to the Allies, because that gives me cover from reconnaissance. It gives me cover from strikes. The southern portion is pretty well out of range of a lot of their tactical sorties without them specifically going to that area. They're not going to be on call that far south. So that would give me time to get this. The purple area would not be as well established, but that would give me time to get that established, to pull out what was left of 352nd and 91st. Probably combine them in Kampfgruppen under it was Otto's general, but probably combine them in a Kampfgruppen under him.
Kreis, I think it was.
Yep, Kreis. Yep. So ultimately I would be pulling them back to St. Lo, and sending Kampfgruppe Kreis into this line as well. But this line would have 21st Panzer, which is in really good shape. Has not seen a whole lot of combat, so fairly comfortable that by tomorrow morning we would have the situation contained on the peninsula, and they would, because they've also got to deal with Cherbourg, and they want Cherbourg for obvious reasons. It's a good port, so there would be a lot more fighting to try to take Cherbourg and get it quickly.
Mm-hmm. So essentially at that point, Cherbourg becomes more of a drain on Allied resources to siphon off some of their strength to take the pressure off the main kind of cordon that you're trying to establish on the peninsula, so that you can... The goal, if I understand it right, is to bottle them up there and delay them long enough for significant reinforcements to arrive, and then force them back up the peninsula?
Yeah. So if you look at the line between the red and the purple lines, that length of line is roughly the same as from 7/11 through 7/16. So ultimately, between the pieces of 3rd Fallschirmjäger, 352nd Infantry, 91st Luftlandde that made it south, along with the 3 divisions of 84th Corps and 21st Panzer, you're forming a line that is a very achievable defensive line within that cordon.
Yeah, you're kind of putting them in a Bermuda 100 kind of situation, right? Where Grant sent his advisor to go take a look at Butler's position in the Bermuda 100, and he sent the report back saying, yeah, Butler's got a great defensive position. He's going to be able to hold off any Confederate attack that comes against him. But at the same time, the Confederates have just as good a defensive position because it's the same bottleneck. So the Allies have kind of put themselves in a bottleneck, at least in your vision, at least, right?
In my vision, they put themselves in a bottleneck where the advantages to the Western move is if you can coup de main Cherbourg quickly, overwhelm the defenses, and storm Cherbourg early on, which is why I'd assume there would possibly there was even talk of that they would do a total effort airborne drop on Cherbourg, because you're estimating 3 airborne divisions roughly. There would be talk of you could drop airborne divisions here, here, and here, and bum rush Cherbourg from all sides early on, and probably be landing in the defenses just about.
And perhaps a commando rangers assault on the port itself, or something like that.
Yeah. Yep. Run your commandos, your rangers, and probably your best infantry division making a run at the port, but led by your elite troops that can use smaller vehicles, and other stuff like that. So that was definitely a thought on if they go with this peninsula thing. Ultimately, the 2 benefits of going with the peninsula strategy are that you can concentrate your force on one portion of the line, and you can also concentrate on capturing Cherbourg quickly and getting an actual port rather than having to move your logistics over beaches. If you don't get the port and have to battle over the port for days, then this winds up hurting you because it leaves unmolested divisions able to swing literally like a door hinge, cut the peninsula off, and now you've shot your bolt on an amphibious assault, and it's going to take you a while for you to be able to do another amphibious landing. Your airborne is on the ground, so they're stuck, and you're going to have to fight your way out. You're going to have to fight your way out on this narrow front, which is the advantage to whoever's defending. Ultimately, I would not be advising an assault into the peninsula for quite some time. My advice would be lots of artillery and build up a strong defense, and then start making those pushes, getting to recapturing Carentan, which would make the line easier to hold. Probably cutting up to Perrières from St. Lo and cutting that chunk off, which would tighten the noose. And then at that point, if the Allies want to keep pouring resources into keeping an army in this little tiny peninsula, then good luck.
Yeah, no, indeed. Good luck. Now, I just want to kind of wrap up with one last question here. if you were to give an allied force, of course you don't know which troops were where exactly, but if you were to give kind of one area of the allied thrust your Rommel seal of approval, right? Like that was the best thing that they did to me, and obviously the worst thing that I had happen to me. Who would you give that to and why?
I think they're British, possibly, but whoever was fighting Third Fallschirmjäger down here, they have been the biggest thorn. That is why this line is purple and not red, because that is I would like to do this, not I have already done this. I think they have seen the most success, and their success has actually got the biggest potential to cause a breakout. They're the problem I would have to deal with first before I can deal with anything else on the peninsula. I've got to get this stabilized. And that's why which they didn't get much time to be in action, but 21st Panzer was sent directly to St. Lo and then directly into the fight against whatever probably corps is attacking Third Fallschirmjäger.
Interesting. All right. Well, thank you very much, Rommel. I'm just wondering, before we go, if you have any final thoughts on really anything related to the game.
No, it's definitely massive. I have never commanded something on this scale, so I can't say if I can guarantee it was realistic, but there was definitely a level of panic running most of the time, just trying to sit down and I could sit down for an hour and try to figure out where my divisions were and still have no clue.
And I keep saying last question, but do you think that it helped with the immersion that there were, it would be 1, 2, 3, 4 levels of telephone, right? Regiment, division, corps, and then you going on to between what's actually happening on the, or even, regiment commanders wouldn't necessarily be at the front line either. So there's the troops at the front line giving the regiment commanders reports, then regiment to division, division to corps, corps to you. Do you think that helped with the immersion? And of course it would have hurt with in terms of you getting information, but
I think it really helped with the immersion. I do think that, and I think from dealing with the level of confusion, and then there was a time when my 81st Corps commander went dark for a bit. It turns out he had displays, so I wound up being on the division commander's net for a lot of the battle, and that kind of created a bit of chaos, as you'd have the Corps commander and the army commander both trying to, me mostly just trying to get information and give recommendations, and then also occasionally having to give orders. I will fault myself for taking command of a battalion for about an hour.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
So I was driving around trying to figure out, is this all really as bad as everybody's saying it is? Because on the radio net, it sounded like I might as well just go ask the nearest Frenchman for a white flag. I'm sure I'm going to hear it from our French members for that one. But I was driving around and came across a battalion that was retreating, but it didn't look like they needed to be retreating, so I told them, well, why don't you go attack those people over there? They annoy me. Go deal with them. Although I did remember to put in my orders, I believe, something along the lines of, I'm going to put a helmet on and not go stand in the front line. I'm not an idiot.
And so did the attack that you ordered go well, or?
Well, it went well as could be expected. Pushed them back across the stream that they were at, and then at that point I basically ordered the troops, okay, you've successfully counterattacked, now set on that stream and defend it against their counterattack that we know will come in at some point, and then I drove away.
For the benefit of the viewers on the stream, I just circled the spot where that happened, just west of Saint-Mary-Église. So, yeah, preserved in memory, the heroic final battalion action commanded personally by Erwin Rommel. Getting back to his glory days in the Alps of Italy, commanding a German infantry battalion in World War I. Oh, man. All right, well, General Rommel, or Field Marshal Rommel, I should say, it's been a pleasure. It's been a pleasure talking with you. Thank you for discussing the results of your efforts on D-Day here with us.
Thank you.
All right, and for those of you who have been listening intently for this past hour, I thank you for your attention. Certainly been a wild ride, this D-Day game. Unfortunately, we couldn't stream the last half of it as I was gone. Maybe we'll hear more of that later. But, yes, so hopefully this will serve as kind of an interesting analysis, right? Because Tack, as he's talking right now, has not heard the debrief. He has not heard what actually happened. This is just his thoughts at the end of the game. So, thank you for listening, and stay tuned, because I intend to do as many interviews as I can, or as are practical. I've got an interview with Ike already lined up, and interviews with Corps commanders, and I might even interview a couple division commanders who had extraordinary fights over the course of the day. So stay tuned for all that, and that will all come out before the final debrief. So it'll be up to you guys listening to piece together what actually happened on D-Day before we let you know. So thank you for watching, thank you for listening, and I will see you with Ike.